This is an event report for FAMiFights 2017 held in the FamiLab Makerspace in Orlando, Florida. And I've got to say, it was not my finest outing at a robot event. It was definitely a little disappointing. None of my robots did anywhere near how I was hoping they would do, even though I quite honestly didn't have high hopes for one of them at all. But they all kind of proved disappointing, so I'm going to go through each of them, talk about what happened during the fights, and maybe I'll even do a little teardown on them and we can look at what the insides of the bots look like after the event. First off, I want to look at Demon Spawn, which was the robot I was most excited to bring to this event. This is my first new Beetle design since I built Sawin, which was only supposed to be a temporary kind of in-between design anyway, but this is something I've been working on since December of 2016 as far as CADing, and I had problems getting the parts in and getting things made, and even this version that finally competed was very compromised. I got some parts water jet cut, but I screwed up my own order, so it's missing some really essential pieces. The weapon rail on this side is aluminum, but this side is very much 3D printed because, well, I screwed that up and I didn't have that second weapon rail. So already going into this tournament compromised. My first fight was against Drumroll, which I fought twice before in the past, so it was kind of cool. He won the last time we fought and I won the first time we fought, so I guess this was the tiebreaker. And this is the one fight where Demon Spawn performed mostly like I wanted it to. The weapon spun up really well, sounded nice and seemed stable, it drove relatively well, and I was able to hit him quite a few times, smack him around. He seemed not really be able to get any purchase on my robot with his drum. But as the fight went on, every time my robot would turn, obviously the gyroscopic force of the disc makes the robot want to go up on one wheel, but the body of the robot wasn't always following along with that. The top and bottom armor of the robot started drifting away from the rest of the body, and that was definitely concerning. I think the only thing that kept the robot from actually dying in the fight and just completely falling apart is the fact that the frame is designed to interlock on itself. So at that point, it just couldn't or had a very hard time falling apart because everything was kind of puzzle pieced together. So I was able to actually hit him hard enough that I knocked his drum off and did some pretty significant damage and won that first fight. My second fight was against another robot I've fought in the past, Trilobiter, and I got Demon Spawn repaired the best I could in between matches, trying to fix up that issue. I added some UHMW blocks inside to kind of sandwich the top and the bottom together a little better, but I knew going into that fight that the entire front end of the robot was very, very loose, and with one good impact from Trilobiter, it was completely separated from the rest of the robot. I found out that the main body was pretty much intact. The belt had just slipped off, so the entire front section was just loose and everything else was as it should be. So I drove around a little bit, figured why the hell not? Weirder things have happened than another robot just spontaneously combusting. But that didn't happen, and I ended up being the one who not quite so spontaneously combusted when Trilobiter hit me again. It ripped off both of my side armor pieces, sending my drive motors scattering across the arena. I tapped out immediately after that, though that was kind of pointless because, as was pointed out to me, there was nothing left that could have worked anyway. And my last fight was against Deja Voodoo, which was a really nasty undercutter, and another thing from Busted Nuts Robotics. And I had a very frantic rebuild session on Demon Spawn in between fights. Running 3 robots just did not work to my advantage at this event at all. I was constantly either waiting to get in the arena or frantically trying to repair things. But fortunately, they gave me some extra time to try to get the bot together. I got everything kind of put back. I had an extra frame rail I was able to put in, but I found out that one of my drive motors was completely seized up. So I disconnected that from the controller just so that I wouldn't stall out that motor and burn up my ESC. And when I got it in the ring, I found out that not only was my right drive motor barely working, but my weapon was hitting the floor. Actually, I think it was hitting the floor at the beginning of the Trilobiter fight, but it was doing it worse now, and I really couldn't move. I put the robot in the arena and closed the door, and I couldn't even drive it into the starting square, but instead of just pulling it back out, I figured I'd at least let Deja Voodoo hit me once, and he basically ripped my wheel off and took a chunk out of the front of the bot, and I called it after that. So as you can see, the robot's really not together anymore. So the front end, this was completely separated off by Trilobiter. This part I cut off myself, so that isn't actual battle damage. But this whole front section was ripped off. I don't see any real damage. I think Trilobiter might have hit the aluminum side, so if it did, there's no real damage here. Maybe it hit the tooth. That actually might make more sense. There's a nice little cut there on the side of the tooth. So that might have been what actually happened. But still, the teeth are in decent condition. I think this whole weapon assembly is good to go again. But this side, the 3D printed side, is what got hit by Deja Voodoo, and it had a similar sharp wedge-like piece on this, and that just got completely torn off. The rest of the bot, you can see the sides are barely connected, and this was a lesson learned very much the hard way. I'm very used to when building robots, you put Loctite on all your bolts. That's it's what you do. I didn't even consider what's in Loctite, and that it might have acetone or something that acts as a solvent on 3D printed ABS. So what I think happened is that when I Loctited the bolts here at the bottom of the robot, they actually ate through the ABS. You can see here, right where the bolt would be, there is now a nice, just empty, gaping hole. All the bolts on the bottom fell out. They were tapped into the plastic. So, yeah, another lesson learned. Don't do that again. It actually looks like the bolts here that was holding my weapon motor in place snapped off, so that's gonna suck to fix. But beyond that, the main body's pretty much fine. As I said, this motor's locked up. I'm going to try to open it up and see if I can repair it. This one, I think, is okay. I'm not sure what was going on. Maybe it was shorting against something that I'm not aware of. But either way, it's getting torn apart. I might be able to salvage some parts of this frame, but more or less, these sides are going to get replaced. The front end's going to get improved. They're going to be stuck together in a more robust manner than they were this time. And hopefully this robot will work better next time. So one of the other things I didn't realize until I disassembled the weapon on Demon Spawn is that this 3D printed spacer had actually become ingrained into the bearing. So it actually was stuck and took on the form of the bearing here. You can kind of see it has a little indentation there on it. This was meant to be an aluminum piece, so I'll get the aluminum piece cut down for the next version. Next up, we're going to look at my Antweight Sadistic Magician. And to be quite honest, this is a robot I was only kind of half-heartedly thinking would work. I put a gigantic weapon motor in this thing, something that I think is usually used for beetles. I put a 12-inch long titanium bar on top of it, and I basically just wanted to see what it would do. My first fight was against Toxic Ant. I managed to spin the blade up, and as soon as I hit him, the blade went flying. I was only able to use 2 bolts to hold the weapon blade to the motor just because of how narrow the blade was. And basically, I think as soon as it hit anything, all the threads just got ripped clean out of the motor. So it basically became a fight where I was trying to be a wedge without a very sharp wedge against a robot that's designed to be a very sharp and effective wedge. He did manage to get himself stuck in the arena wall a couple times, like the gap between the floor and the frame of the arena, and it became kind of a running joke, I guess, that every time they opened the arena to unstick him, that they'd stick the weapon blade back onto my motor so that it could fall off 3 seconds later. So a very poor first outing. That sent me back to the pits, trying to figure out how to get the blade to stay on. And I basically arrived at the conclusion that I would use the prop adapter. Brought the blade up significantly from the height that it was originally, which was not something I wanted. The blade was sitting at right about 1 inch off the ground when it was connected directly to the motor, but that brings it up, I think, about another 1/4 inch or so, which definitely wasn't favorable. And after having a ridiculously hard time drilling out the center hole in the blade so that the prop adapter would fit through it, I got everything back together and went into the arena against Werewolf. Werewolf was definitely a robot I was interested to see how this would go up against. My last robot that had fought Werewolf, Neanderthal Roomba, had gotten torn apart by it. Ironically, the body design was very similar. I was using a much better infill this time instead of that really crappy like 20% infill PLA I had before for a frame. But it's still 3D printed ABS, so it's still the same kind of plastic frame. And I spun up the weapon, and immediately the robot jumped up in the air, and the weapon motor jettisoned itself out of the top, tangling up all the wires and flopping around behind the bot. Werewolf came in, hit me once, flipped me over, and I tapped out. What I found afterwards was similar to Demon Spawn, and actually I realized at first here with Sadistic Magician, was that the Loctite I put into the frame had melted the frame. That was coupled with the fact that I had some countersunk holes on the bottom of the robot holding the weapon motor in place with no washers or anything to help support it, and that caused the base of the robot to become incredibly fragile, and the motor basically just ripped itself out of the frame. It still had pieces of the frame attached to it. So I kind of added some washers, did a little tweaking, and got the robot into the Antweight Rumble. I wasn't really worried too much that it would actually function. I more or less just wanted to see if I could get one good hit off of it in this situation, and I managed to spin up. I think I actually did get a hit on one or two robots that mostly just resulted in me flying up into the air and spazzing out. And then as I spun the weapon motor back up, the exact same thing happened. The weapon motor decided to eject itself from the robot, and it was holding on just by one wire now. I ended up getting pushed to the other side of the arena, where I basically got stuck in a pile of other bots. So if I want to crack this guy open, so this is the mess that is inside the bot, poor cable management and all. And we can see right down here at the bottom, this is the section I had to hold the weapon motor in place. I actually had these little discs printed in here that fit into the recesses in the bottom of the motor, which I think actually worked pretty well, but it was the bolt pattern and the Loctite that ended up giving way. You can see these sections in between are completely broken apart. And this section here is actually still kind of mushy. When I opened it up the other day in between fights, it actually had a puddle of plastic goo here. Basically, the plastic had reliquefied, and now, I mean, you could see it just crumbles apart at the touch, meaning it's not going to hold a weapon motor of any type, I don't think, and definitely not a weapon motor that is way oversized for the robot. I believe, actually, in the werewolf fight, broke one of my motor tabs, and I didn't even realize that, so that probably wasn't good either. And last but not least, but actually filmed like a month later from those other segments, we have Little Demon. And Little Demon did not do nearly as well as I felt he did at the previous, well, not really previous two. I guess at Small Bots Mass Destruction, I felt like it did okay as a proof of concept. Didn't really get to fight with it much at the event at UF, but at FAMiFights, it did not perform how I wanted it to. Its first fight was up against Sorry Charlie, which was a tuna can full body spinner. Came across the arena. The first hit actually sent me flying, flipped me upside down, but I got to do my favorite move with this robot, making it do its weird somersault of doom with the weapon. I got back up, hit him, flipped him over on his side, and I was actually going back over to knock him back on his wheels, and he tapped out before I could make it there. So a fairly quick knockout for round 1. Rounds 2 and 3 for me basically went exactly the same. Round 2 was up against Tinker Toxin, which I would say was my nemesis from Stuart. That was technically Nanotoxin, but they were both basically the same robot at this event, so who cares? So round 2 was against Tinker Toxin, and it's a wedge, so it really just played against all of my strengths. He's able to get under me every single time, since I don't really have much of a feeder wedge on Little Demon. He almost got me in the pit pretty early on. I was able to get around to his sides and get some okay hits in, popping him off the ground just a little bit. The body on that robot is PLA, so I think I was starting to take chunks out of it because I did notice some kind of green dust across the arena when all was said and done. And I don't think it was anything off me. Basically, the way this robot is designed, I think it kind of really hurts me against wedges because I'll go up the wedge, and then if I try to drive forward, my wheels just flip me on my back, and then I go somersaulting across the arena. At some point, my top armor popped off, but I was still functioning, and I still finished the fight. I think it was a pretty easy judge's decision against me. My next fight was up against Mustachio, another wedge, and I kind of mentioned at Stuart, it was one of the bots I went after in the Rumble because I wanted to see how effective Little Demon could be against it. And the answer here is basically the same as the answer then. Not very. Exactly the same thing happened as happened with Tinker Toxin. I went up the wedge, flipped over, got a couple glancing blows off the side of it. There's really not much to hit on Mustachio. The wedge is angled both in the front and on the sides, and then the rest of the bot's pretty much curved, or it's either wheels or curved armor. So it just was really hard to get a grip on it. And once again, in this match, my top armor came off actually really early on, and that just did not help things. Granted, it all stayed together, and I'm pretty sure I ended up lasting the entire 2-minute fight, but it was not a good 2 minutes for me. The Rumble also did not go well for me. It was kind of a fun opportunity to fight some of the spinners that I didn't get to face, and obviously spinners are a little easier target for Little Demon. I think I got a couple okay hits in on a few of them. I know Krabby was one that I managed to pop up in the air pretty well. A little ways in, I ended up losing one of my wheels. I believe it was to Sorry Charlie, and that kind of left me just crab walking around the arena awkwardly, and I kind of got myself out of the majority of the action for a while by accident, just because I was having trouble crab walking back to where everybody else was fighting. After a little while of the usual Rumble chaos, I think Mustachio decided that there were entirely too many robots on the arena floor and started just cleaning house, pushing everybody it could into the pit. And eventually that included Little Demon. By the time I managed to get myself back to where all the robots were fighting, within a few seconds I was straight into the pit, and with only one wheel drive, there wasn't really much I could do to try to prevent that. So that did not go as planned. So to do a teardown of Little Demon, it's much easier to take the top armor off because, you know, it kind of wants to do that on its own anyway. So nothing inside is really out of place. Everything's where it should be. It looks like the back panel here is bent a little bit. You can see the wheels aren't quite straight with each other. I actually noticed the side piece here is going into my wheel. Probably was causing some issues too. Battery is a little worse for wear, but still basically fine. The weapon motor is definitely coming loose, both from the bottom of the robot, the bolts are loose, and then the blade itself is definitely a little loose on here. I'll have to check to make sure this motor is still in good working order before I try to use it again. But more or less, it's fine, it's just not operating at maximum efficiency. So that is the event report from FAMiFights 2017. I'm actually going to have to sit out a couple robot events as I'm recording this last part. As I already mentioned, it's a bit later than when I filmed the beginning of this. Today is the Battles at Maker Faire Miami. I actually have the stream up on my TV right now, and I'm wishing I could have been there. But unfortunately, some practicality issues got in the way and kept me from making that trip. I'm also going to have to sit out the next Small Bots and Mass Destruction in about a month, since I already have plans to be at a concert in Tampa, and it's too much of a drive to go between the two during the day. So my next event is going to be probably in June. Right now I'm registered for Clash of the Bots, which I went to last year and really enjoyed. My plan was to compete with all 4 weight classes, UK, ant weight, beetle weight, and the 15-pound hockey bot. But I've heard there may be another event in Orlando a little earlier in June, and because my main reason for going to an event in Charlotte is kind of going away most likely, I may end up switching and just doing the Orlando event instead of traveling out to North Carolina. So that remains to be seen, but either way it gives me about the same time frame. I am currently making new parts for Demon Spawn, so I'm going to basically take the same idea and refine it a little bit and hopefully get it running better so that it has a more competitive chance. I think the weapon itself has potential. I know the weapon motor and everything work how I want it to, so I just need to put a little more time and effort into getting it exactly how I want it to be. Demon Spawn is getting rebuilt with a feeder wedge this time. I hate doing feeder wedges on vertical spinners because I'm also afraid that I'm going to completely block out any chance of the weapon hitting anything if I can't get under my opponent. But I think I have a strategy that should potentially work. Of course, that's pretty much any strategy that I try to put into a robot. It might work. With Sadistic Magician, I don't know if I want to basically take the same design and try to make what I built here work. Hopefully not using acetone with ABS would help it stay a little more together, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's going to be enough to really keep it from exploding again. I also do have plans for a more quote-unquote conservative version of it. I think it would still hit pretty hard and still be a crazy robot, but it would be a little less stupid in the weapon motor department. But I also am torn at the same time in wanting to build something completely different for the ant weight. I have 2 spinners, and I'd kind of gone the spinner route after getting a little tired of Gorgor and Electric Eye getting ripped apart. And I'm kind of tempted to go back to a lifter style robot just to have some variety in my collection of bots. So we'll see. I'm going to work on the 3-pounder and the 150-gram bot first, and I'll keep brainstorming on the ant weight and see what comes up. So that's it for this event report. So I'll see you guys, I guess not at the next event, but an upcoming event later.